Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me today. You're with Foothills Alliance, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And Foothills serves what portion of South Carolina?
We serve Anderson and Oconee counties.
Okay. And your guys are doing what services?
We do sexual assaults, victim advocacy, and child abuse and neglect advocacy.
All right, great. So you're part of a um, uh, individual domestic violence, sexual assault, and child advocacy organizations that serve South Carolina are kind of broken up throughout the state. And you guys are in the upstate portion of that. Yeah. And for full disclosure, your Foothills Alliance is one of my clients. And you were gracious enough to come on here today to talk a little bit to our listeners and viewers about what it's like after kind of being in the I guess driver's seat of 1 year as an executive director, and you're looking in the rear view mirror. I think you have a lot to tell us now about kind of your story and where you came from and how you transitioned to be an executive director at Foothills Alliance.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I am so thrilled to be here. I'm so thrilled that you asked me. I could not have done it without your help. So thank you for that. It was a crazy, crazy year, a crazy first year for everyone, I think, but for those of us transitioning jobs, especially.
I can't even imagine like walking in. I think you walked into your position in what month?
January 2020.
January 2020. So just a little over a year ago, and then the shutdown in March of 2020.
I started January 6th, and almost exactly 2 months later, we were working remotely.
The world shut down. And for an organization that provides direct services to clients, how just really disturbing for your organization. And then you're new, totally fresh, new baby executive director.
Baby executive director, not knowing a single thing about working in a nonprofit. Since I came from the legal world, they're two very different things. I went from prosecuting to providing direct services and making sure that my organization could provide direct services in the middle of a pandemic. So it was a big giant shift.
So you're saying you were doing prosecution. Were you doing prosecuting DV or domestic violence, sexual assault cases, or what were you doing primarily?
I prosecuted a little bit of everything. So I started prosecuting back in 2013, and I worked at the Anderson County Solicitor's Office, so the 10th Judicial Circuit in South Carolina. I worked there for about 7 years. And I started out as a juvenile prosecutor, and that's when I first started interacting with Foothills, because we would, I would have cases of mine that were related to Foothills work. So they would be there for a forensic interview, or they would be there for counseling. And so I would get a lot of my evidence from Foothills.
Okay.
So after about a year of prosecuting juvenile cases, I was moved up to general sessions, which is just adult court. And I started there doing drug prosecution, and I prosecuted for 5 years, almost 6 years, for everything from drugs to murder and everything in between. So when I left, I was technically assigned as the sexual assault or special victims prosecutor.
Okay.
So I did do child abuse and neglect. I did elder abuse and neglect. Any type of sexual assault or abuse case came to me as well. But I also had my old caseload with lots of drugs. And so it was just a big mishmash of all sorts of things.
That sounds pretty standard for a solicitor's office. You then decide to go and be an executive director. So you went from one fire to potentially a bigger fire. Talk to me a little bit about that decision.
So it wasn't really a decision that I made all at once. Foothills had been without a director for about 6 months. And, had still been working with them. I went almost every day. I have a facility dog, and she was partnered with Foothills. And so I would go anytime that they had forensic interviews or counseling sessions that they needed her for, and I would drop her off. And I would just talk to the staff, out of curiosity, because that's my hometown and I've known about Foothills my whole life. And so I was like, hey, how's it going? How goes the search? Have you found anyone? And they were always like, no, it's miserable. We can't find anyone. The board's trying, but they're having such a hard time and nobody here wants to do it. And so I was driving with my mom one day to Charlotte, and I was telling her about it. And it just kind of struck me as I could probably do that. Like, it's one of those ridiculous thoughts that just pops into your head. Like, I could do that. It's fine. It's a very Monday morning quarterback kind of thought. But she was like, well, you could do that. And I think you would like that. And I was like, well, maybe I'll talk to the current, the interim director and see what she thinks about it. So that next week when I went to drop Roma off, I talked to Shirley McNabb, who was the interim director at the time, and said, what do you think? And she was like, oh my God, this is the greatest day of my life. And she immediately texted the board. It was like, I think I found our person. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And it went both very slowly and very quickly. And then all of a sudden, December rolls around and I get notice that I've gotten this job. And I'm like, okay, well,
here it goes.
Here it goes.
Wow, that is such an exciting time, though. So you are going to this position. You have this really amazing skill set where you've been prosecuting these cases and you're working with perpetrators and you're working with survivors of victims and kind of every sort of type of court personnel and law enforcement and just a lot of different people. And your law, but now you're walking into the doors of and running a business. So tell me a little bit about what you kind of you identified as being the most, like, your priority skills that you needed to get on top of immediately.
I knew going in that the thing that I needed to learn immediately was the financial aspect of the organization, because, as you know, lawyers don't really have a great math background. They don't teach you that in law school. And I certainly didn't take any math leading up to law school as a government major. So it is not my skill set. I am married to the calculator on my phone. And I figured out very quickly that was something that I needed to get my head around. Because, like you said, it's a business, and I've never, run a business before. But I figured that probably the most important thing about running a business is keeping the lights on and keeping the people paid. And in order to do that, I have to figure out where my money's coming from. So that was,
I think your instincts were very good on that one. That tends to be an area that I think a lot of executive directors, even those that are experienced and have been in a job for many, many years, can say they don't have 110% confidence about those finances and reading those financial reports. So good on you for making that such a focus. Are there any other areas?
I would say the other big area was learning how to interact with my board. I'd never been on a board. I'd never worked with or for a board of directors before. And learning that dynamic, certainly I had interviewed with them, but they were a little bit adrift themselves. They didn't have a lot of, between the however many of them there were when I started, I think it was like 10, hardly none of them had any prior board experience. So they weren't sure what our relationship was supposed to look like either.
Right.
So it was really a blind leading the blind kind of situation.
Yeah.
And so I really had to do a lot of asking around and saying, how is this supposed to work? Can anyone tell me how this is supposed to
I can tell you as a consultant in the nonprofit governance sector that most people don't know how it's supposed to work.
Yes, I have figured that out very quickly.
Well, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, just working with the board alone, and they don't know what they're doing, but they're supposed to be your bosses, and they can't tell you how to do your job or what to do. So you're kind of you're really your own boss as a nonprofit executive director, to the extent that on a day to day, you have to know when you walk in that door, what you need to do to run that business.
Mm-hmm.
That's big, Chelsea. Well, how brave and I don't know. I mean, there's just a lot to be said for somebody. Well, I think it does take some level of a dreamer to believe that they can tackle something this big. And there are plenty of people, though, I will say, go into it who I would claim are foolish because they don't have. It's not just not having the skill set, but it's not having the wherewithal to understand they don't have it. And instead of going to find it and seek answers, they just kind of flounder. And you can look around at all the nonprofits where that's happening. So good for you for recognizing your deficit and going and finding, getting help there. So tell me a little bit about, you said the financials were really important to get a hold of, and getting that familiar with the board, how the board operates, how to communicate with them and interact with them. But are there any recommendations you would make to someone who is maybe considering a move to being an executive director, no matter what they're coming from? And then B, any recommendations for that first year transition, that first year as a new ED?
Well, I think you said it best a few minutes ago. You have to know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I'm very bad at asking for help, just historically speaking. I am a type A personality. I am a Capricorn who
You're
thinks
a lawyer.
Yes,
we never want to ask.
Exactly. I think that I can do it all myself.
That's right.
And that if I can't do it all myself, for some reason I have screwed up, and the end is surely near because it is not all within my realm of control.
Such a perfectionist.
I am. But you have to also know your own limitations, and you have to know when you need help and who you can go to for help. And to me, that was the biggest thing that I had to learn, because I had to go to my staff for help and get them to teach me how to be an executive director.
Yeah.
It was like being a sweet baby lawyer and going to my paralegal and saying, "Hey, how do I make this motion?"
Exactly. How do I fill out this paperwork? How do I?
Exactly. How do I fill out this grant paperwork?
Mm-hmm.
What does this acronym even mean? And what about this acronym? And why are there so many?
Yes. And who should I call about this? What program? Who's doing this? What's this program? Yes. And they do know, your staff knows. That's a great recommendation. So, and would you say, how have you spent your first year then? What's kind of taken over? What do you see as being the overarching theme of your first year and has expended the most energy for you? I mean, outside of the obvious, COVID has been a freaking nightmare for every organization. So I would be remiss if I didn't say, I know most of your time has been spent dealing with that, and what we're together, we're not together, we're in the building, we're not in the building, what kind of policies and procedure. And I know you have spent a lot on that, but what else has dominated this year?
I feel like my theme for the first year has just been kind of to steady the organization, because 6 months without an executive director for any nonprofit is that's a long time.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a board who's not intimately familiar with the direct services that you're providing.
Yeah.
And so you really, they truly were their own director, and they did fabulously. They kept that place running smoothly and beautifully, and the interim director did wonderfully and very graciously came out of retirement to help them do that. But that's a lot of transition.
That's a huge,
that they
huge
have to
impact, trauma,
that they have
change.
To do. It is, as you've pointed out to me, it's traumatic for the organization and for the people in the organization. And so I felt like my whole first year really needed to be dedicated to steadying the ship, steadying the course, and just making sure that everybody felt okay, felt like we were in a strong place as an organization, and felt like they could focus on providing their direct services without focusing on also doing my job, which is,
Right.
Another place where I was kind of like, oh, should I really ask them for help? Because my whole job is to make their job easier, and I can't make their job easier if I'm asking them to help me with mine.
Yeah, you're
So
just
it
one more
was
thing to do. Yeah.
right. It was just a lot of finding a good balance and finding, my own way, and
Yeah.
how I wanted us to look and how I wanted us to feel. And
Yeah.
so that's a lot of what my first year was, just trying to make it steady, trying to take it from an 11 to a
Yes.
3 on the
Yeah.
daily.
Excellent. What a good point. I mean, decreasing that kind of level of crisis feel. I mean, you've already got COVID. People are already ramped up. You've had this transition ramped up. You work in a crisis atmosphere, ramped up. Everybody's working from an 11. And to just bring them grounding and to help them understand they now are going to be supported and loved and cared for, and that we're going to listen to everyone and have this be a cohesive process moving forward where everybody's just really included in the conversations. And it's a wonderful thing that you've done, Chelsea, and not to let your ego kind of win the day and say, I know what's best for this organization. It takes a good, strong executive director to step back and say, let's kind of ground this first.
And really figure it out together, because it's like I tell my directors all the time, I've never provided your direct services.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like to be a clinician. I wouldn't even begin to know how to do a forensic interview. Please don't make me.
Yeah. Yes. And I don't want to. I want you to do your job, and I want to give you the tools to do it better, and put you in a position for an organization that's going to support you to do it even better. So that's wonderful work that you've been doing. What would you say is the hardest part of being an executive director?
I think that, outside of the financial things, learning good boundaries is very hard for me, because I'm not good with those anyway. When I was practicing, it was one of those things where you had to have your phone with you all the time, because you never knew when someone would call and need you, whether it was, a judge or another lawyer or law enforcement. And it was like I was always on hyper alert and always ready to answer my phone. So I've really had to dial back and understand that I don't need to be available 24/7. So as an agency, that is something that we have worked on, because they, all of my employees are like that as well. They're all we have to be on it. We have to answer emails at 9:00 at night. And I'm like, don't you do it. So when I send emails after 5:00, I have to put in the title, don't read this until the next day.
Good.
So that's, that was something that I really had to work on. But to me, the hardest thing is that even after a year, and I think it goes back to my perfectionist roots, I still find things that I'm missing. It's like every time I turn a corner, I'm like, oh, I should have known. I should have known that was wrong, and that wasn't that I shouldn't have done that, or that we had this piece missing at the organization, or I needed to do this a different way. And so it's like not seeing the pitfalls before you fall into them. That's the hardest for me, because I'll fall into them and then I'm like, all right, now I got to climb my way out of this one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, because I remember my first year, I've always felt like I was stepping into a pile of business, and I never knew where it was. And then I would step in it and be like, well, of course that's there. I had no clue. that this too shall pass. And you get to a point where you know where the piles are and you're able to avoid them much better. And the presumption that was there to begin with, that you would always know where the trouble spots were, is still there, but you're able to answer to them. And I say, yes, I know. And I promise that is definitely something that gets easier over time. It does. So what would you say is the best part of being an executive director?
The best part for me is getting to see the results of the direct services, because that was something that I didn't get as a lawyer. I had a lot of violent crimes that I would prosecute, or even, property crimes that I would prosecute. And people would be very upset at the outcome. And it wouldn't matter what the outcome was. If the outcome was exactly what they wanted at the beginning, they would still be upset at the end, because there's this misconception that the justice system can make you whole again.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how many times I told them that it cannot do that, that it is not designed to do that.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. They always still kept that in their brains. And so I walked around with a lot of people who were very upset all the time. And mostly it was me. And I understood that. And that was something that I just had to kind of carry around. And it was really uncomfortable and not very rewarding when you work very hard on your cases and you care a lot about your victims, to have them be, still unhappy at the end when you get the result that you worked so hard for. But now I get to see, the success stories every day. And I've really gotten the staff, mostly selfishly, in the practice of emailing out when good things happen.
Yay.
So, when a client makes a breakthrough in counseling, they will send, the email that's, doesn't have any identifying information in it, obviously, but just saying, hey, remember when we all worked on this forensic interview and we worked so hard on it? She's doing great now. She had a real breakthrough, and here is this drawing that she did today in counseling. Don't you love it? And I'm like, yes, I do love it.
Yes.
So it's so rewarding and gratifying to be able to work so hard to give my people the tools that they need to do the job and to do it well, and then to see
what difference it can make. Yeah. Well, and what you're describing, yes, it helps you but the part of it that's even bigger than that is you're building just really this healthy organizational culture of getting that affirmation for the hard work and effort they're putting in. You give them boundaries to begin with, and then you help show them what a difference they're making. And as a byproduct, you get to hear from that and feel from that too. And that's such a good thing. That's really great that you're thinking of your staff in that way, and have created that place for them to share their successes, because it's not always that way. As we both know, that we don't always have successes in that work, and a lot of the time the survivors they don't get what they think they need there either. But it's awfully nice to see the impact of when it does work out. Well, is there anything else you want to share with me about your first done stamp it year as the executive director of Foothills Alliance?
My first done year. I can't believe I made it.
You made it and came out with flying colors. You're doing just a really bang up job. You now have a full board, and you guys are functioning in committees, and you're getting ready to do your strategic plan, and you have some of the strongest leadership on your board, and your staff are so engaged in taking a bigger role within the organization strategically. So you're really set up for success into the coming year. I mean, with everything else going on, you guys are in the best position you could possibly be in.
like I said at the beginning, you have to know what you don't know, and you have to know when to reach out for help. And when I got the email, with your information in it, and it was like, reach out to this person if you need help, it was like the clouds parted. And I said, oh my God, thank you. I need help. Please help me.
Well, I wasn't meaning for this a commercial for me, but hey, this works out. Come on, bring it on.
I mean, truly,
Timing
because
was
those
right.
are, those are all things that I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't know that a board was supposed to operate in committees. I had heard about that. I'd seen it on TV.
That was a boring television show.
Oh, you got to watch HBO, girl.
Oh, no idea.
Oh, shoot. What is the name of that show? I'll email it to you. Anyway,
Okay.
Succession.
Oh,
Watch Succession. It's great. But their board is terrifying. And, I had just assumed that was how all boards operated, that it was just this cutthroat, evil place, this evil world.
Even in Anderson County.
Right. And then you come into Anderson County and they're like, I don't know. What do you want to do today?
You're like, this isn't HBO.
Not HBO.
So
Chelsea, you do have to know what you don't know.
Well, and in keeping with what you said with that, I have reached out to a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault organizations, and I've shared this with you and have said, like, I want to support you guys. I want to do what I can, especially during this time. And I've heard a lot of crickets. And I've said from the beginning that those organizations that are willing to kind of put themselves out there, expose themselves, allow the EDs, allow themselves to be vulnerable, they're the ones that are going to make it through this with shining colors and may come out stronger from the pandemic and from the budget cuts and the transition of leadership and those sorts of things than they were going in. And I believe that firmly about your organization, with you as at the helm. And I expect nothing but good things for you guys. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, thank you.
And we'll catch up very soon.